My name is Jens Reinke. I'm the director of the Institute of the Study of Humanistic Buddhism, ISHB, at the University of the West. I warmly welcome you to the first Zoom lecture of the academic year 2022-23. And I'm very excited to introduce today's guest, who in a way is actually responsible for me ending up in academia, because his lecture on Tai Chi in Taiwan at the IABS some years ago was the first I've ever seen on something modern and Buddhism. And it really got me hooked to stay in the field and to do Buddhist studies. So I'm very excited to welcome Dr. Justin Ritzinger. Justin Ritzinger is Associate Professor of Religious Studies at the University of Miami. He received his PhD from Harvard University in 2010. A scholar of modern and contemporary Buddhism in China and Taiwan, Ritzinger studies the development and articulation of Buddhist modernism, excavating the role played by seemingly non-modern ideas and practices in that movement. He is the author of Anarchy in the Pure Land, Reinventing the Cult of Maitreya in Modern Chinese Buddhism, and has published on topics including Buddhist eschatology, engagements of anarchism and evolutionary theory, and the dynamics of Buddhist tourism development in contemporary China. He's currently working on an ethnographic study of a working-class lay Buddhist organization in Taiwan. And today he's sharing some of his findings with us. The title of the talk is Food, Family, and Philanthropy, Humanistic Buddhism in a Working-Class Taiwanese Community. So, but before we begin, just a few more words on today's event. Dr. Ritzinger will have a presentation for about roughly 40 minutes, followed by 20 minutes Q&A from the audience. The Q&A will be moderated by our new research assistant. And we're very grateful to Vivian last year, but now Angelica Barrera-Ang is working for us for the upcoming year. So I'm very grateful, Angelica, for your support. Thank you very much. But without further ado, let's just begin. Dr. Ritzinger. Justin Ritzinger, sorry. No, I'm getting confused. Names.
Thank you. Let me get my PowerPoint up. All right. Can everyone hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, so today I will be talking about food, family, and philanthropy, humanistic Buddhism in a working class community. So I want to begin with an anecdote. So once upon a time, when the century and I were young, I used to work as a translator for Dharma Mounted at Nongchan Si. Not the impressive piece of architecture that you see today, but the old Nongchan Si before it was demolished. While I was there, and I was a translator there for about 3 years, I had one conversation over and over again. Right? People would always ask me, how long have you been a vegetarian? And I would always reply, truthfully, I'm not a vegetarian. Well, butchersu. And they would always invariably reply, oh, you're not a vegetarian yet. Oh, 还没有吃素, right? Not a vegetarian yet. There's a lot that hangs on that yet, that 还没. So it's become an expectation in contemporary Taiwanese Buddhism that anyone who is seriously involved in Buddhism will be a vegetarian. They might understand that it is difficult, that it might be something that you have to do in stages or with accommodation, but the idea that one would be involved with Buddhism and simply not be a vegetarian and not intend to become one simply doesn't parse. Now, this wasn't always the case. Traditionally, as many of you are well aware, in the Vinaya, the only requirement was that meat be pure in 3 respects. A monk cannot have seen, heard, or suspected that it was killed on their behalf. In China, by the 5th century, you have the circulation of texts like the Mahaparinirvana Sutta, the Lankavatara Sutra, Brahma's Net Sutra, as well as indigenous texts like Liang Wudi's on abstinence from alcohol and meat that helped to establish vegetarianism as a norm. And according to John Kieschnick, by the 6th century, vegetarianism was, quote unquote, reasonably common. Now, in the late imperial period, lay vegetarianism becomes problematic because consistent vegetarianism creates a tension with the larger society. As Terhar has pointed out, abstention from community temple sacrifices and ancestral rites essentially placed individuals outside of the larger social system. As such, it comes to be associated with heresy starting in the Song dynasty, and you get cool phrases like eating vegetables and serving devils appearing in anti-heretical tracts. So as a compromise, Chinese Buddhism develops all sorts of occasional vegetarian practices. So there are days of abstention, the Liu Jai. People would abstain from meat as part of mourning rites, and people would abstain from meat as part of vows for particular purposes. Now, in the modern period, you have the rise of lay Buddhist lodges and the religionization of Buddhism that calls for a set of distinct lay practices to mark this as a distinct identity. So vegetarianism gets held up as one of these badges of Buddhist identity for lay people, whereas previously lay Buddhist identity had been fuzzy, to say the least. And oftentimes these institutions would have vegetarian restaurants attached. And in contemporary Taiwan, we've seen a Buddhification of vegetarianism, not least through the proselytization of major organizations such as Foguangshan, Dharma Drum Mountain, and Tzu, to try to create more of an association between vegetarianism and Buddhism and loosen the association between vegetarianism and what Buddhism would consider heresies, like Iguan Dao. Now, most previous work on this topic has tended to focus on issues of, it's tended to be historical and focus on issues of abstention and asceticism, or else on ethical and karmic frameworks supporting vegetarianism, and tended to look at food as a symbol in discursive regimes. What I want to do today is take as my inspiration anthropological literature instead, particularly Mary Douglas's classic Deciphering a Meal and Elizabeth Perez's more recent Cooking for the Gods, in which she examines the preparation of slaughtered animals as offerings to the orishas or the spirits, which is perhaps not a comparand that we expect in Buddhist studies. And there are two key points of departure. One, I'm going to focus my remarks on a small case study, the Maitreya Lodge, in which I am doing ongoing fieldwork to give this some real ethnographic texture, and to adopt Perez's sensuous ethnography. So I want to look at food not just as an object of discourse, but as a concrete medium of social action, not simply something that is good to think, as Levi-Strauss said, but as something that is in fact good to eat and good to share with others. And basically what I'm going to be arguing today is that Buddhist foodways are more than what they exclude. They're more than morality and karma. Foodways encode values and social order and habitus, define belonging, and forge connections. Food is a key means by which the brothers and sisters of the lodge are constituted as an open, egalitarian family, and through which they engage their community in charity and proselytization. Examining their foodways, we find a lived Buddhism where pleasure is as prominent as morality, indulgence as important as abstention. So the basic agenda, I'll begin with some observations on vegetarian cuisine in Taiwan. Then we'll talk a bit about the lodge, and then I will present some conclusions and closing thoughts. I had some miscommunication about the length of time that I would have for this lecture. I thought I had an hour to talk and then Q&A rather than an hour for both. So I'll be moving through the material relatively quickly. Apologies if anything gets lost. So I'm going to begin with some observations on vegetarian cuisine in Taiwan. So oftentimes when this is discussed in scholarly literature, there's a focus on ascetic power. The assumption or the approach taken is that ascetic abstention from meat yields transferable merit, and thus vegetarianism is a source of supernatural power. This is what we find, for instance, in Holmes Welch's account of the monastic diet. But as many of you are no doubt familiar with, vegetarian cuisine in Taiwan is anything but ascetic. Whether you are going to a restaurant, to a buffet, or dining at one of the major Buddhist organizations, I think you would be hard-pressed to find ascetic cuisine anywhere in Buddhist Taiwan. Right? And vegetarianism is no longer an exclusively monastic practice. Part of what has happened is that there have been changes to the economy and resulting changes in religion. The marketization of popular temples has made membership in temples elective rather than prescriptive, and thus lowers the tension of keeping a vegetarian diet vis-a-vis the larger society. You can opt out of temple sacrifices, and it really makes no difference in the broader social life the way that it used to. Family, as we'll see, is another matter. And as a result, vegetarianism becomes a consumer choice in the market rather than incipient heresy. And there's a boom in vegetarian restaurants in exactly the same time that meat is becoming more widely available. Right? And if we look at the 2019 Taiwan Social Change Survey, we see that vegetarianism is quite common. Right? 20% of the population has some engagement with the vegetarian diet, although as you can see from the chart, only 4% maintain a consistent vegetarian diet. Another 7% are regular vegetarians, that is, they are vegetarian on certain days of the month or certain times of the day, breakfast, for instance. Some are flexible vegetarians, that is, they eat the vegetables next to the meat, but leave the meat in the pot. And then another 6% are irregular vegetarians. So vegetarian diet is common, but rarely pursued consistently. And part of this is that there's still a degree of friction. So one of the things that I think is really important and characteristic of Taiwanese cuisine is variety. Variety is held up as a kind of value in and of itself, although it's rarely thematized explicitly. So we see this in the night market, which is a shrine to culinary variety, stand after stand after stand of anything you could possibly want in the way of snacks, banquet culture that you see at weddings and end of the year banquets. Right? A grand meal is one that includes many, many different options. And so I want to do some thinking here by way of some Western theories of vegetarianism. So Twigg had a hierarchy of foods, right, that she saw in British culture, with red meat at the top, chicken and fish below, animal products, cheese, etc. below that, and vegetables at the very bottom. Right, the higher one goes in this hierarchy, the more prestige there is. Right? And what happens when one becomes vegetarian, of course, or vegan, is that one cuts off the top of that pyramid, which she argues in Western vegetarianism leads to a revaluation that valorizes vegetables and stigmatizes meat. Right? But in Taiwan, I think you have the same general hierarchy. So vegetarianism wipes off the top of that, leaving a kind of void of high value foods. Douglas also did some thinking within the Euro-American context about what she considered a proper meal, or what was a proper meal in a British home. So meals, she argued, have a certain culturally determined syntax, right? So you can't just have soup and pudding because that's not a proper meal, right? So depending on where one might be, there are certain elements that are expected for a meal to be considered proper. In Taiwan, the classic version of this would be 4 dishes and a soup, right? Sicai yi tang. And typically, I think these include 1 major meat dish, 2 minor meat or animal product dishes, so something like eggs, or perhaps mapo tofu that has a little bit of meat, 1 green vegetable and soup, and rice. Right, so part of what I think causes friction with the larger culture for vegetarians is that there's a sense of deprivation, not of meat per se, but rather of that valorized variety, those high value items, and that syntactically complete proper meal. Vegetables on their own, whether you are a meat eater or not, are not considered a proper meal. And I think that this is one of the reasons that the buffet is the dominant form of dining, vegetarian dining in Taiwan, as a kind of counteraction to the deprivation of variety At the buffet, you find a surfeit of variety, many choices. Buffets are common for non-vegetarians as well, but you don't see them dominating the market in quite the same way that you see them dominating the vegetarian market. I think you also see this with meat substitutes, right? These are substitutes, not imitations, right? Vegan chicken, suji, fools no one. No one would think that that is chicken, but vegetables are not seen as sufficient for a meal. They don't form a syntactically proper meal. They're the last menu in a last on the menu in a non-vegetarian restaurant. They always have quite simple preparation. The processing of things such as mushrooms and beans in that transformation yields a food of higher value and helps to fill out that pyramid that we saw of twigs. And it also adds possibilities for variety in terms of textures and flavors, yielding a syntactically complete meal without meat. So to turn to our case, I want to talk about the Maitreya Buddhist Lodge. The Maitreya Lodge is located in the Bada district of Taoyuan, not very far south of the Taoyuan train station. So here we see the lodge there on the right, and in the middle we see the lane that is located upon. This is a rather poor neighborhood. It was described to me by one of my informants as a pinminku, as a slum, which doesn't have the same sort of squalor that term suggests in English, but it is a rather hardscrabble and poor area. There's a lot of joblessness in the area. There's a lot of drug addiction in the area. And overall, it's quite a poor neighborhood by Taiwanese standards. The founder of the lodge is Brother Zhong. He is a 63-year-old Taoyuan native and a former gangster. When he was 30 years old, he had an encounter with the Dharma and specifically the Maitreya Gate, and takes refuge with Master Chang Zhao, who was a proponent of the Maitreya Gate in Taiwan. He studies the canon primarily through Yin Chun's Wondrous Cloud collection and begins teaching it through a series of vegetarian restaurants. Early on in the 2010s, he meets Sister Jia, who's a Taoyuan native in her mid-30s. She is a former addict whose life was turned around at the lodge, and today is the youth director there and increasingly a junior partner for Zhong. When he originally founded the lodge, it was founded as Maitreya Vegetarian, Susher. So this was the last of his string of restaurants. Downstairs, it was a regular buffet-style restaurant, and upstairs was the Maitreya Lay Buddhist Lodge, the Susher Jusherlen. Right, it's founded in 2011, inspired by Yin Chun's principles for establishing lay Buddhism. It's independent of, but respectful of monastic authority, and uses the flexibility of lay Buddhism or lay status to proselytize to the laity. They offer sutra classes based on the Wondrous Cloud collection, ritual practice, particularly repentance, as well as sutra recitation and dharma assemblies, and engage in charity of various forms, ad hoc social work, aftercare for local children, feeding those in need, and snack distribution. And I place them within the stream of humanistic Buddhism because of the centrality of Yin Chun's thought to them, their adoption of the rhetoric of humanistic Buddhism, although it tends to be less grand than that's seen in the major organizations, and the kind of social engagement work that they do. But part of what I want to use this group for is to expand our view of that movement and what it might include. So this is part of my ongoing fieldwork. I've been at this since 2014 when I first encountered them, although it has been interrupted, of course, by the pandemic. I'm hoping to go back in the spring of this next year, and hopefully in summer as well. So I'm going to begin by looking at food and the role of community at the lodge. So the lodge failed as a restaurant. It fails as a restaurant after about 3 years. Zhong attributes this to the lack of parking, which I originally thought was a bit of an excuse. But given that most people in Taiwan are not vegetarian or not consistent vegetarian, I think a vegetarian restaurant requires a larger catchment area. So foot traffic alone is not enough in this neighborhood to sustain it. And yet he continues to cook lunch and dinner 6 days a week, open to all. So any given night at the lodge, Zhong begins cooking in the late afternoon. He has dinner in the warming trays by 5:30. People drift in and help themselves. They're seated together on stools around folding tables. They chat as they eat. Some stay for the night's class or ritual, some don't. And every night at the end of dinner service, Zhong runs home to wash up before class or the night's ritual. All right, so some of the key features of this: it's restaurant style. It's a buffet. The front of the restaurant is open. This is very important for the feel of the institution. According to Zhong, it is communal rather than atomic. So even though it is buffet style and kind of restaurant style, people don't eat alone. They eat with one another. The majority of diners are regulars, the people who attend most of the events, with a rotating collection of strangers. It's very low ritualization, very low formality. You can come directly from work. You can wear whatever you are wearing. There's no special manners that have to be observed. There's no way for you to feel dumb or inadequate by failing to follow the local customs. And socially, you have mixed seating. So you have men, women, children, old and young, all seated together. And the food is always free. You can make a donation, but from what I've observed, most of the time, people do not. It's free with no expectation of a donation. So if meals encode values and social order in habitus, what is being encoded here? Right, the first thing that I want to highlight is accommodation and accessibility. Low ritualization, low formality. This is a community that is open to anyone at any level of knowledge. There's nothing that is required. It is very entry level in its ethos. Secondly, egalitarianism. Socially, it's mixed. Everyone sits together. Compared to a meal at a temple, for instance, no one gets to eat first, as monastics would do at a temple. Everyone eats together. And the teacher, the person who is, we might expect to be the highest prestige person in the community, is there at the stove. Shengyan or Xingyun may have been great men or may be great men, but it's hard to imagine either of them making you fried rice. It's very much an egalitarian ethos. And what you find with this as well are these quasi-familial bonds. The eating is communal. Most of the people who are eating eat there several times a week, some of them every day of the week. You have multiple generations together, so young and old, which increases the feeling of family. And like a meal in someone's home, it's free. It's not a market transaction. Right? And this points to the power of communal eating. Across cultures, food makes kinship. When, where, and how often we share food defines our relationships. And this has been observed in connection to Taiwan as well. So David Jordan famously said, or famously defined the family as the unit attached to a rice pot. And Arthur Wolfe also defined the family as those people who eat together, and noted the stove as the symbolic embodiment of the family. When the family splits, they divide the stove as well. Right, so these frequently shared meals really define the core of the lodge, and it's a reinforcing loop. So it's not simply that meals create the community, it's that coming to the events often encourages people to eat there, which in turn encourages people to attend the events often, right? It increases the social bonds. Right, if we look at the family dynamics of the lodge, a lot of the regulars have strained family lives. The adults tend to have issues with spouses, sometimes with their grown children. Many of them come from non-vegetarian households. And many of the children who attend, and many children attend without their parents because they have unstable home lives. At the lodge, they have an attractive alternative. There's a lot of family rhetoric at the lodge. They very commonly say, we are like a big family. They refer to each other as brother and sister, which of course is not uncommon in Taiwanese Buddhism. and you have the presence of children. Children are both welcome. So if you are a mother or father who has children that require care, you're welcome to bring them along with you. If you are an older adult whose children might be grown, or if you never had children but wanted them, children are ubiquitous. And for women, this is an alternative family where cooking is not expected. They're freed from that aspect of domestic labor. Right? And so this eases some of the complications with commensality, with sharing meals. If you're a vegetarian in a non-vegetarian household, your options are really to either not eat at home, to make both meat and vegetarian dishes, which adds cost and time and money, or to eat only vegetable dishes, which leads to this deprivation of variety and the failure to complete a proper meal. Right? The lodge as a commensal community offers the opportunity for variety and those proper meals, but also reflects and reinforces those strained family relationships. So at least one woman who is heavily involved with the lodge, her children are grown, her husband continues to eat meat, and she told him to take care of his own dinner. She is going to eat at the lodge all the time now. So it reflects the strain in their marriage and also kind of helps to cement it because they no longer eat together. Right? Beyond those core members and attendees of rituals, you have individuals coming who are food insecure, who are temporarily unemployed, mourners who are adopting a vegetarian diet, and those children from unstable homes. And it has a reputation for this in the neighborhood as a place that feeds the local needy. So essentially, they are eating betwixt public and private. So they resemble a restaurant in that they have a buffet rather than dishes on a shared table. It's open to all, anyone who walks in, but it resembles a family in that you have this kind of habitual commensality and it's free. It's not a market transaction. And what I would argue is that this helps to establish an ethos of the lodge as an open family. So both a community constituted by these close social bonds, but one that is fundamentally open to others in a way that natal families are not. And perhaps the most indicative anecdote about this is the manifestation of the kitchen god. So when I was spending time there in 2016, one of the minor marvels that occurred on a regular basis, if you looked in the security monitors upstairs that they have to make sure that nobody steals anything while they're involved in a ritual, the pattern on the stainless steel of the stove appeared to look like a face, a bearded man. I wish I had a better picture than that. You can't really see it there at all, but it did rather resemble a bearded man. And this was said to be the manifestation of the kitchen god, which is indicative because the kitchen god, of course, is a domestic deity. Commercial kitchens do not have a kitchen god. So this shows the way that this space straddles that line between public and private, between restaurant and family. The second thing that I want to turn to in terms of the lodge's food practices are the fasting or perhaps feasting precepts. So one of the biggest events of the year for the lodge is the 8-precept fasting retreat, the Bagwan Jiajie. So this event regularly attracts more than 50 attendees, which is full capacity for the lodge. This is as many people as they can fit upstairs, and includes people of all ages, right, from retirees all the way down to elementary school children. It's held biannually, spring and fall. As you can see from the notice there, one was just completed. And the key components of this ritual are the taking of the precepts themselves, repentance, and sermons on the significance of the precepts. The precepts, as many of you know, are those listed there. The most important one for the lodge is the 8th, no eating after noon. And the fast is seen as especially karmically powerful. A vegetarian diet is essentially just the karmic bare minimum, but the merit of the fast is seen as especially powerful, as you can see from the dedication of merit here. There's a dedication of merit of the fast as part of the ritual, And you find this in miracle stories at the lodge very commonly. And I've written about this elsewhere. It's kind of an essential part of the Dharma treatment plan for people who are encountering some sort of difficulty, whether that's an abusive boyfriend, death, or cancer. Right? These stories very often have an 8-precept fasting retreat as the culmination of their treatment plan. Right? And I want to note here that this particular merit dedication is the financial version, where individuals dedicate the merit of their fast to their finances. When I was there in 2016, this was handed out to all working age adults, which I think reflects the assumption that everyone in this community of working age faces, or at least fears, some kind of financial difficulty. And so this is a kind of voluntary abstention to ward off an involuntary abstention in the event of financial difficulty. Nevertheless, despite the fact that this is the fasting retreat, it actually centers around a feast. So in 2016, the menu included 8 dishes, right? 8 dishes in the warming tray there: tempura, fried sweet potatoes, fries, pizza, rice noodles, veggie rice and white rice, 2 soups, 4 kinds of fruit. And we were repeatedly told to get more, right, to chirbawidian. And from what I observed, almost everyone went up at least twice. A number of people went up 3 times. This is very different than the other 8-precept retreat that I attended, where all we received was a simple lunchbox. At that event, I was unable ultimately to keep the fast. My daughter was a baby at that point. I was up late feeding her, and a lunchbox was just not enough to get by on. When I went to this with the lodge, I once again had a small baby that I was staying up late to feed, and yet it was no problem to keep the fast because I had feasted so well prior to noon. This event has medium formality. It's open only to attendees. You can't just walk in off the street for this feast. Silence is maintained, but it's not very strict. No one gives you a dirty look if you're chatting quietly. It's followed by rest and socializing before the ritual events begin. And it has a ritualized end. So at the end of the meal, you are to rinse your mouth to ensure each bit of food has been removed, and then seal the fast with a dharani. So for deciphering this feast, what we find is essentially an extended family feast. It's a kind of Taiwanese Buddhist Thanksgiving, right? You have higher formality, you have greater extravagance, abundance, and indulgence in terms of the food offerings, which is a rare opportunity for many vegetarians, and it serves to reinforce these ties in an extended kin group. So people who are involved in the lodge, but who are not able or perhaps not interested in coming on a daily basis, the way many of the core brothers and sisters of the lodge are. Next, I'd like to turn it to youth outreach, feeding hungry little ghosts. So children are central to the lodge's outreach and charity work. Part of this is based on Yinshun's youth Buddhism, Qingnian de Fujiao. Buddhism must appeal to the young to be viable, according to both Yinshun and Zhong. So some of their key initiatives are ad hoc social work, free aftercare. They have an allowance program for regular children, monthly kids class, and they had a kids reading group that was since discontinued, and afternoon snack distribution. For these last 3, food played a central role and plays a central role, right? And the approach to children's food is different than that to adults, right? Cross-culturally, happiness tends to be emphasized over health in children's food. So if you think about a McDonald's Happy Meal or something like that, it's not particularly happy, or it's not particularly healthy, but it's something that you give your kid to make them happy, right? And here we see cream puffs that I made with the brothers and sisters of the lodge, right, which again is not particularly healthy, but it's a fun treat for kids. So what we find in the children's food is abundance and indulgence. So with the kids a reading group in 2018, they were reading Yinshun's The Dharma is the Light of Salvation. Midway through, they had halftime snack of miswa or right? A thick Taiwanese noodle soup, sweet soup with white fungus, and a salad of potato, taro, corn, and apples, right? Which isn't that much, but we had just eaten 2 hours prior to that. So I was a bit shocked to see us eating so quickly again. That same summer, in 2018, at the kids' class, we were watching Xuanzang, and then we had an intermission snack of fried noodles, fried rice noodles, fries, hash browns, cake, and Taiwanese shaved ice, which almost gives me a stomach ache just reading the list, right? So very indulgent, a lot of fried foods, a lot of sweet foods, but it makes kids happy. And this is part of the idea with after school snacks as well. This grew from a less successful lunchbox program aimed at adults. The location wasn't good for that. There were very few passersby at dinner time, but it was located between, the lodge is located between several schools. So there's actually many kids in the afternoon. So as a result, they began handing out after school snacks. So Monday afternoons from 2 to 4 p.m. Plus they have production. They tend to make at least 100 servings. There are 6 volunteers, more or less. There's no sign up, there's no signed roles. Whoever can come comes. And they make a snack, usually include a piece of fruit, and offer some kind of drink like you see here. Starting at 4 when school lets out, they're handed out to passing school kids, as well as moms and grandmas on scooters who come by to pick up snack for their little ones. Right? And part of what I think we see here is a kind of club philanthropy, rather than the kind of industrialized charity of the major organizations. There's kind of a DIY vibe and approach to this. Right? Why snacks? The barriers are very low. The logistics are simple. Joan has years of restaurant experience. There's low cost existing equipment to use and readily available supplies. They can go to the market. People donate vegetables and things such as that to the lodge. And sometimes they just go to Costco to pick up things in bulk. The location happens to be opportune for this. And there's a universal appeal. Everybody likes snacks. Why kids? One, there's the emotional rewards of giving to kids. Giving to kids is gratifying. Seeing them happy is gratifying in a way that's harder to achieve with adults. It's low cost, and it kind of feeds into this ethos of the lodge as an open family. They are a family of adults who care for children, but not necessarily their own children. And this is distinct from the industrialized philanthropy of the big three, Fogongshan, Dharma Drum, and Tzu-chi, in that it's small scale rather than large. It's informal rather than rationalized and bureaucratized, and it relies on the same notion or the same universalized notion of the good, yet is socially embedded in a way that their efforts are not. It's very much of the neighborhood and is involved in personal relationships there. And one of the key aims of this program is forming affinities. And what they're doing here is more than karmic, although that's what the term typically suggests. Part of what they're doing is helping individuals to learn association, right? It creates a positive connection to the children between the lodge and them, between them and Buddhism, by associating Buddhism with treats rather than asceticism. Right? And it performs a kind of connection work, to borrow Elizabeth Williams Oberg's felicitous term. Right? You have the participation of the volunteers. It helps to connect the volunteers by giving them a common focus for cooperation. It can serve as a kind of gateway to greater involvement. So some of the moms who come by with their kids end up sitting around and helping. As they sit around and help, Zhong or Jiejia ends up explaining things about Buddhism, answering questions that they might have about Buddhism, and it offers an opportunity for conversation with the children, right, which allows them to know who requires their kind of ad hoc aid. If you need to know who in the neighborhood needs food, handing out food every week is a good way to find out who is in need that way. So the final point that I want to highlight is the role of social media. So after I helped with snack distribution the first time, I got home late at night after that night's class to find out that my Facebook had completely blown up and I had 30 or 40 notifications. And what I discovered is that Jia would photograph everything that was happening, post it on Facebook, and then share it to other pages, right? Italian vegetarian friends and so on, which was a way of advertising food to those who need it, as well as advertising the lodge and its works. And this worked out quite well in securing them news coverage in 2019. So they were featured on the local news, who came to interview them and film them in the course of their snack distribution. So this kind of highlights the importance of social media as a continuation of the field site. As Sarah Swenson has pointed out, social media serves as a low-cost communication and publicity for small groups without PR offices. The lodge cannot create news in the same way that Foguang or Tzuji can, so it provides visibility for otherwise nearly invisible groups. This would be a location and an activity that would be easy to walk past and not really notice it at all, if you happen to even be in that small little alley. And it also offers an opportunity for curated self-presentation. So Jia is in charge of the group's social media, and at the lodge, every event has food, and every post features food at least as prominently as the event itself. There are always pictures of the food. There are always pictures of people eating and enjoying the food. It is very much an essential part of the lodge's self-presentation. And I think what we see here is photography as a kind of proselytization strategy, right? This is essential to the image of itself and of Buddhism that the lodge is trying to present. And Jia told me that food at the lodge needs to be rich and abundant, fang fu, so that people don't think learning Buddhism is misery, right? Literally cold and sour, han suan. All right, so some conclusions and parting thoughts, which works out well since I know I'm almost out of time. Right, food is the medium through which connections are formed, deepened, and maintained at the lodge. Food makes kinship, and as a result, communal dining betwixt public and private helps to constitute the lodge as an open, egalitarian family. The feast before the fast renews and solidifies connections with the extended lodge community, and snack distribution and social media is connection work that bonds the community and reaches beyond it. And the community's focus on food and its pleasures works to overcome reactions that might be barriers to deeper connection. This is an insight that I draw from Perez, who talks about the importance of overcoming disgust at animal slaughter. So in her Lusumi field site, African Americans who are unused to this sort of activity, in the process of volunteering in the kitchen, become accustomed to the sounds, sights, and smells of preparing freshly slaughtered animals as offerings to the spirits. And what she argues is that this is an essential part of habituation and acculturation, through which essentially the volunteers are cooked and become potential initiates for the religion. In Taiwan as well, this serves as a way to try to overcome perceptions of Buddhism as cold and sour, right? This is an sensuous internalization of sensibilities, to use her language. So variety, abundance, and indulgence teaches Buddhism as a religion of happiness at an embodied level. If Perez's Lusumi initiates were cooked in the kitchen, the lodge's Buddhists are baked at the buffet. So I think the implication of this for the study of Buddhist food waste is that we have to attend to what Buddhists eat as well as what they don't. We have to attend to pleasure as well as morality, to indulgence as well as abstention. Food is not simply good to think, it is good to eat and share. And it's a powerful lens through which to recover Buddhism as a lived religion. Thank you.